Alrighty, it is oh, not quite, but just about noon, and we are recording. Hello, and welcome back to the Welty at Home Slow Reading Virtual Book Club. This book club alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors related to Welty. Today, we continue our series exploring Meanwhile, There Are Letters, the correspondence of Eudora Welty and Ross Macdonald, edited by Suzanne Mars and Tom Nolan. During this series, we have read and discussed about a chapter each week, and we will continue to do that, taking a break for spring break in a couple of weeks, but we still will gather once more next week. My name is Anna Traylor. I am the Special Projects Coordinator at the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. First, some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select Raise Hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. And a lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well. So be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and again. I collect that weekly chat transcript to share with the newsletter at the end of our series. But if you would like access to the working document for the transcript for reference, please reach out to me at info@eudorawelty.house.com. And with that, Suzanne, would you take it away with our discussion today?
All right. Well, let me mute my phone before I do anything else. There. All right. I thought we might start off today by talking, taking as our first topic, the way this chapter seems to focus on two people whose lives are grounded in literature and the reading of literature, who long to share this life as readers and writers with another person. And I think Margaret would have been a likely person to share that sort of life, did share that sort of life with Ken, but she became, it seems, increasingly unwilling to do so, not writing, antagonistic, and retreating into herself after the loss of her daughter. And Tom will correct me if I'm going to, but Eudora then found in Ken what John Robinson could not give her, a person who was so devoted to the life of writing and to reading, and did want to share that life with her. So Ken says, writing is a lucky way to make a living. You and I were lucky enough to be brought up in a culture where language was paramount, and the English language is the repository of nearly everything good, he says to Eudora. So I thought we might start there. What do you think about this as this chapter and the discussion of reading and writing and the importance of reading and writing to the Eudora Welty and to Kenneth Miller? Tom, did that seem a fair statement to you?
Well, sure, and I love the way they describe other writers as well as themselves and each other, and I love the way she describes Patrick White and his stories as throbbing stuff.
Like, yeah. I had a note from Pearl McCaney, who can't be with us, and that's one of the things she wants. And I thought we would talk about other writers here, and she said that about that quote about Patrick White. She said, this caught my eye because Eudora used meteors to describe Faulkner's short stories and looking at stories. Some stories lead a train of light behind them, meteor-like, so that much later they strike our eyes. We may see their meaning like an after effect. And Faulkner's seem not meteors, but comets. They have a course of their own that bring them around more than once. They reappear in their own time in the sense that they reiterate their meaning and show a whole further story over and beyond their single significance. So that mention of Patrick White
Right.
and meteor-like, and then she'd use the same
Yeah.
metaphor for Faulkner. Yeah.
Yeah. She was more concise about White.
Yeah.
Uh, Chunks of fallen meteors or something cast upon us from another orbit. And in the context of not knowing quite what to make of him, but she knew the stories were powerful and significant and described them in a way that conveyed both those responses.
Yeah. Harriet, and then Monica.
I was on your same wavelength in that I made a list of the writers in the chapter, and there's 17 writers, and I probably missed some.
Oh, good. I'm glad you itemized them. I have a whole list of them here for us to talk about.
And I wanted to say in particular that I was really surprised to find Ken reading Doris Lessing and Gail Godwin and recommending them to Eudora Welty. That is, I had not pictured Ross Macdonald reading the feminist writers of that period, and so that's just interesting to me. Their breadth, as well as their the idiom their idiom for knowing the world is through the books they're reading.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that down as a note to mention too, so we're on the same wavelength there. Monica, and then Beverly.
Yes, Doris Lessing and Gail Godwin were really wonderful little surprises there. I wanted to just pull out a quote that Ken said that I just loved. This is the November 1975 letter that's on my page 275, where he says, "I sometimes think fiction is the smoke that reveals and conceals the fire." And I just love that, and thinking about that in terms of both the authors that they talk about, but just thinking about that in terms of writing in general.
And Eudora then later says, "I agree about it." You know, so she likes that. Monica, what are you thinking of in terms of the smoke that reveals and conceals the fire? What?
Well, just what that fire is, and it also works well with Eudora's um line that I think we talked about last time, about um is it plot is the um metaphor for meaning in a story? Is that what she said? So it seems like as I've mentioned before, I've been thinking about trying to learn to read from the perspective of craft, and I loved this insight of them talking about that there's a fire um that's both um the fiction is the smoke that comes from the fire but also conceals the fire, and just thinking about that metaphor for meaning is really interesting.
So the fire is the idea, the heart of the story, and the fiction is the smoke that reveals it and conceals it.
I think so, yeah.
And I was thinking about it more narrowly, but I think you're right. I was thinking about it autobiographically, the autobiographical impulse, but maybe, but I think yours is more appropriate. Yeah, Beverly.
I thought it's very sweet that in the, as they go back and forth about the film Chinatown, and she asks, "Have you seen it?" And then he tells her more or less that it might be a little crude for her.
Yeah.
That the beginning and the end, and then some in the middle, and that sort of amused me, because while she certainly wasn't known as being a salacious writer, we go on in the same chapter to talk about The Robber Bridegroom, which has some salaciousness, as does the play. And so I just found that, I thought it was sweet. I'm not really going to recommend that you go look at it because you might be offended when you see it.
Yeah, I thought of that too. And it reminds me of a story that Reynolds Price told me, which I probably shouldn't tell on. Anyway, the Reynolds Price told me that Eudora had seen Danny Kaye in a play on Broadway, and she said to Reynolds, "I never in my life thought," and I won't say the word because I don't know if I'm supposed to on Zoom or not. And I never in my life thought I'd heard Danny Word say the F word. And Reynolds said to me, "And I never in my life thought I'd hear Eudora Welty." Jane.
Okay, well, I just want to say I also enjoyed all the references that were in this chapter to other writers, but and I love Doris Lessing. I've read many of her works, especially the feminist, the Martha Quest, etc., and the Canopus and Argus. But I was just curious that he would say that Ken said that he found her to be, what was it, coarse, clumsy, and coarse. But I don't know. I know we're not on a critique of Doris Lessing, but I guess that was just like he was protecting her maybe, or warning her about the books that they might be, that he might consider her a dainty Southern flower and not be open to the realistic scenes, for instance, in the Doris Lessing stories.
Uh,
I'm not sure about that.
seems to me, I think that he's just talking about Lessing per se, technically, her technique and so on. I think he does say that he liked how she got larger and opened up her scope and so forth later. And,
Yeah.
and when he went back, he was willing to go back and reread her after Miss Welty said what she said. So
Yeah,
he,
and I think you're right that he's gone back to her. He said he rejected it sort of, and now he's gone back and found it
yeah.
engaging. Harriet?
I think my hair was just still up, but I was going to say the protection thing. Yeah, I was there. There's some unintentionally amusing spots in the letters, and I thought that he does it with Gail Godwin too. He says that there's some crudity in that language, and it's his female protection is unexpected and maybe out of place with Eudora. Yeah.
Also, that was himself. That was his own reaction. That's how he felt.
Right.
He didn't believe certain things really belonged or were necessary in writing.
Joe Ellen.
I just want to note that Doris Lessing really came out of the 50s, but made her real mark in the early to mid 60s, I think, when people did need to be hit over the head with a hammer. That was when we were first, they were first talking about the stereotypes of women in literature, and there was a real battle. And this conversation is in 1975, so I think some of the crudity or the straightforwardness might have felt like been there, done that.
Beverly.
He also says about Chinatown or just in general, and I think I didn't mark it in my book. I should have. I think it was his letter that so many writers think that they have to add something titillating to their work. And I think in 1975, that's an interesting point, whether it's a movie or a book. That's I think he was speaking a truth. He was actually talking about the movie, but that titillation that perhaps takes away from the point you're trying to make.
I want to move us to a different writer. What this really struck me was Eudora was reading Middlemarch when she's in London. I mean, in New York. She says, I went to see All Wilderness at the Circle in the Square, mainly to enjoy the performance of Geraldine Fitzgerald. We'd got to be friends in Jackson on our visits to work with New Stage, and to go backstage afterward and talk. I'm reading Middlemarch, which I'd never had. You have, I expect. I was always sure it was worthy, but that hadn't made me read it. Maybe I should say, and that hadn't made maybe I should say, and that hadn't made me read it. And how delicious it is. I look forward all day to coming back to it at night. Coming back to the hotel to read Middlemarch. How delicious it is. I just love that description of Middlemarch. Any other writers we want to talk about? I wanted Melissa to maybe say something about from last time, B.S. Pritchett, because we never got to him. Melissa, are you willing to do that?
Sure, yeah. Welty wrote letters to Pritchett pretty steadily from about like 79 all the way until his death in the late 90s. And so I've been thinking, just having done a little bit of work on those letters, just been thinking about comparisons to these ones, where Welty does write quite a lot to him too about other writers, about writing. Those letters are also have a very affectionate tone, a lot of love at the end. I think one difference, of course, is that Welty was also really good friends with Pritchett's wife, Dorothy, and they exchanged letters too, where you don't see that with this exchange of letters. Um, but Welty was a great fan of Pritchett's work for quite a long time before they knew each other as friends. Um, I was thinking across back to last week too, when we were talking about writer's block and how the writing of letters maybe is a fill-in for writing fiction for, in some places for Welty when she wasn't able to write fiction. I think maybe you can see that in that passage she has about confluence that ends up in Optimist's Daughter later, kind of trying out language in a safe space with another writer and talking about writing is still a form of writing while you're working through writer's block.
Yeah, and Ken had read V.S. Pritchett too, and they talk about that a little bit. So and this is before she has met him when they're
Right.
talking about him. So
Yeah, she met V.S. Pritchett in 79. And I think another thing that I'm thinking about with Pritchett and these letters with Ken are the difference in the meetings. She talks, how many times do she and Ken talk so far about, I could meet you here or let's try to meet there, and they don't make it happen? With Pritchett, they met 6 times, and they were so dedicated to finding chances to meet each other when Pritchett and his wife were here, and she traveled to London to meet them. And so that I think is a difference too in these two friendships, but maybe
yeah,
something she learned from this friendship that she carried over to Pritchett, which is like, I'm going to meet you when I can, like make that happen because she didn't make it happen here.
like she says to Ken, maybe you and Margaret could meet me in New Orleans. That doesn't happen. But with
Right.
Pritchett and Lady Dorothy, they met in Savannah and had
They
that.
met in Savannah. They met at Vanderbilt, in New York at the Algonquin. They both stayed there and exchanged the letters they have there are really great, where they even sent postcards to each other while they were in the hotel together. Um, so I'm thinking about just the difference in meeting too, how important these meetings maybe were with Ken because there were so few of them.
Yeah, there are about 6 here too. But anyway,
Yeah.
spaced over a longer time. Joe Ellen.
Just wanted to raise a question. Based on a couple of things Melissa said. One, we've noted that Ken Millar, how seriously he and Eudora Welty got to know each other through letters, which they really had to. Melissa and I have talked before about how both Pritchett, who was 10 years older than Welty, was very aware, and Welty at that time was very aware of biographers' feet in their backs. And in some respects, sometimes I think that they really relied on their significant exchanges during those in-person meetings. And I don't know, Melissa may know more about that. But that's where they make wry references to the fact that their letters might be seen, which I'm sure she did not expect at all with Ken Millar. But anyway, I'm just interested in whether anybody knows.
Well, no, he convinced her. He convinced her.
Oh
to
yeah,
keep.
later. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Maybe that was the result why she assumed with V.S. Pritchett.
So we talk about the letters where they talk about Reynolds Price. Here's another writer that they talk about. What about the letters about Reynolds? They come up over and over again. His name comes up over and over again. Tom?
Well, he admired his writing, and I think they're both kind of careful to be fair and sort of objective and subjective at the same time in the context of what was not a universally positive response to that novel, I guess. And but I know Ken was delighted to find Well, he put a reference to a Reynolds book in his book, Sleeping Beauty. Right? He goes into the missing girl's room, and he's looking at her belongings, and he finds a copy of a Reynolds Price book. Although
Permanent heirs, yeah.
he doesn't, he mentions the title, he doesn't mention the author. And it's just such a wonderful grace note in the context of this book, which is dedicated to Miss Welty. And I know we enjoyed him a lot in conversation and admired him as a writer. I think it's obvious in the letters.
I think one thing that Eudora does in her reference to the novel they're talking about here, which is Surface of Earth, is pull her punches in talking to Ken about it. She really wants to know what he thinks, and she doesn't want to tell him beforehand what she has said to Reynolds. And what she said to Reynolds was kind of shocking. I'm going to read it to you. Here's her letter to Reynolds. I write, she praised the brilliance of the writing and said she planned to read the novel again, but she rejected what seemed to her the novel's vision of human nature. I am not persuaded, not made able, to see along with you human relationships as time after time and in all the variations there shown demonstrated, dwelt upon, dreamed about, as essentially blood-sucking, voracious self-satisfactions.
Oh.
And then she goes on. When I read it another time, I'll see if I might have fallen back on some sort of unconscious resistance to that devouringness of human relationships. Certainly, I don't see it as you do, but this isn't necessary. I just need to understand and follow your dramatic use of it. All you are asking of your readers is belief in what you show us, not agreement with it. And whatever I feel next time, I am committed fully already to admiration for the novel's huge challenge you put to yourself and met with such sureness and power for the huge accomplishment. You did exactly what you set out to. Not many can claim the same. Monica.
It's interesting to watch Ken's appreciation for Reynolds Price's work grow in these letters. And in his October 19th, 1975 letter that continues on to page 272, I thought it was interesting. First, he says, and from Willa Cather, it isn't too great a leap to Reynolds Price. So that's a fun connection he makes between Cather and Price that I'd like to think more about. And then he says, he's reading The Surface of Earth. I find it engrossing and liberating and am thrown back powerfully by it into my own first and last theme, the father heart. Which, what a great phrase that is, the father heart. And then in all its delicate and gross detail, it seems to me strong and original, very much Reynolds's own, as well as ours now. Though it was written in the unavoidable aftermath of Faulkner, no shadow falls on the page. So I love those two things about Price's work, that it resonates with his own theme of the father heart, and though it's written in the unavoidable aftermath of Faulkner, no shadow falls on the page. I really appreciate those descriptions.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think it sort of changed Eudora's attitude toward the novel. On the one hand, she had written to Reynolds that kind of, she pulled back from it, but that kind of shocking, your blood-sucking, voracious devouringness. But when Richard Gilman attacked the novel in the New York Times in his review, Eudora wrote a letter to the Times defending Reynolds. She wasn't, she did not like the grounds of Gilman's attack on him, which was a generic. And she also, I think, wanted to defend her friend. So
I just continue to really appreciate the richness of insight into the way that writing communities work in this collection, because that's something that I find really interesting. Because while we like to think about writers as being individual geniuses burning in their own individual places, it really is important to recognize them as part of larger communities, I think.
And another thing that Ken tells Eudora is that Ralph Sipper liked the book. His friend, the owner of Joseph, the provider of the bookstore owner, and so that's another persuasive thing for her, I think. So it really is a community response. I liked it that they both read Jane Austen. He had gone back to Jane Austen, and Eudora likes to talk about Jane Austen, and Elizabeth Bowen, and the autobiographical posthumous pictures and conversations that Eudora had reviewed, and that he found radiant, kind of radiance. And so, yeah, so all of those writers. Any other writers that we should talk about? I did want to go on to Beverly's theme of films, but before we do that, maybe we should talk, so we don't delay it too long, about the meeting in Santa Barbara. So in June, Eudora goes to Santa Barbara and spends a week there, and appears at the conference, and then here's Ken at the conference. So what did we make of that and the letters reflecting back on it? Beverly?
It made me very happy. I mean, the letters between them, and then his introduction of her,
Yeah.
which was fantastic. And, I'm not sure how generous of spirit I would have been if I were Margaret sitting in the audience listening to him describe Eudora Welty in such glowing terms. I might have gotten my nose a little out of joint. But her response to her visit there's not a single negative word on either person's part, except that it was too short. And she says later that she wished there had been more time for walks or something along that line.
Rides, yeah.
Yeah, rides, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Monica and then Harriet.
Yeah, I agree. It would have been weird to be Margaret sitting in the audience and hearing her being is as quiet and shy as the moon. Only afterwards do you realize that the light has changed. I mean, how gorgeous is that? I love how, especially in Welty's letter after that, she says, I felt so happy being shown what was important to you in your life, and then it made me feel how well you knew me and my wishes. And I feel like, I don't know, there's this throughout these letters, they're both, I think one of the things that has made this such a strong connection is they both feel seen by the other. And so I think getting to literally see each other in person really seems to have strengthened that connection so much. But I appreciated Welty's articulating how seen she felt by him, because I think that's such an important part of friendship.
Yeah, wonderful. Harriet and then Bill.
I was thinking about his introduction, and in the period where he's writing that introduction, he writes to her that it sent me back to your photographs. I never saw such a steady moral eye. And I just like that phrase for thinking about Eudora and her photographs and the moral eye, and the way he sets her up to read Where's the Voice Coming From? I'm thinking about it in the context of the period.
She didn't read that this time. That's the next one. She read into fiction here.
After the book says after this introduction, Eudora read Where is the Voice Coming From?
What page are we on? I thought it said words into fiction.
That's interesting. Well, anyway, I don't have the page number here. I searched my notes, but I was going to say that
she does read Where is the Voice Coming From in Santa Barbara, but I just don't think it was this year. But
okay.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Okay. I was going to say about Margaret's letter to her that I kind of loved the letter, and I particularly loved the moment where she talks about the blooper, the news piece that about us contained a marvelous blooper that we both enjoy cooking. I can't imagine how it occurred. Of course, we both look like we enjoy cooking and eating, but then Eudora sends her a cooking pot, and Ken writes, thank you very much for the pretty gift of the pot. It wasn't necessary. It's hilarious to me because it seems to be missing the point that she's responding to Margaret and the blooper by sending a cooking pot.
Bill, and then I'll come into. I've got a comment from Pearl, who can't be here. Yeah, Bill.
This particular chapter started me thinking about when did Eudora, if she ever told you, or because I haven't read ahead, when did she start getting suspicious of his cognitive decline?
It's
And
later. It's later.
Later, yeah. So, because she spent a lot of time with him when he came to Eudora Welty Day, if you will, and then she spent a significant amount of time with him here in Santa Barbara. But maybe it's just me. I can just start seeing some. I mean, his writing is wonderful in these letters. He uses marvelous phrases, but there seems to be a repetition of a number of things that where he repeats, we've got this new pup and his name is yada yada.
Yeah.
And so I just wondered if she, because I had two good friends. One who went into real serious cognitive decline in her late 50s, and then another mutual friend. And I knew the first one was becoming, afflicted with Alzheimer. And I tried to mention it to the other friend, and she was in complete denial about it. She just denied it. So, but it started making me really sad as I read these letters in this exchange as to when is Eudora going to start picking up on it.
Tom, I think it's in 76 that she begins really to pick up on it. But on the other hand, when she was told he had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, she would not accept it. She just couldn't accept it. Anna and then Tom. Come back to Tom.
I just wanted to draw our attention to some of the interesting comments that have emerged here in the chat. A commenter asked when Eudora first crossed paths with Reynolds Price, and an answer was given. He picked her up at midnight after a train trip to speak at Duke. I shared a link to an essay by Price about his friendship with Welty there, so you can view that. But there's also a couple of questions.
That's when he was a student at Duke, and he was assigned to pick her up, and she said, "Don't pick me up," and he went anyway and did it. Yeah.
So that's a fun read. We love to reference that one. But there are a couple of questions from Christina that I wanted to maybe bring to our attention, see if we can answer those. Christina mentions that she loves Ken's introduction of Eudora and agrees with Monica that it might have been a little awkward for his wife to witness such. So her question is, could Margaret Miller's attitude about Eudora's relationship with Ken have influenced their ability to meet as much as they would have liked? I understand that Ken took his marriage to Margaret very seriously and that he would never have engaged in any behavior that would have been considered inappropriate. But perhaps Maggie, did she put any pressure to keep that relationship a largely can't say this word, epistolary one? There we go.
Tom, you want to speak to that? We can't hear you yet.
Let's see. Let me ask to unmute here. Do you see that pop up?
I got disconnected from the server a little while ago, and when I came back, I guess I need to unmute again. Thanks. I don't know. I think they met as much as they could. I did want to mention in the since we come to the photo section in the book at this point, there's a picture of Ken and Maggie at this library event in Kitchener, Ontario, and she's looking at him. I mean, I'm projecting, I'm imagining, but he's got this kind of dashing, mischievous grin, and it seems to me she's looking at him like, yeah, something's up. I know you. This was taken the day after Ken and Miss Welty had met and walked all around New York. And then the next day he went to Canada and met Maggie, and they had this event at the library there for both of them. And just a few minutes after that picture was taken, Maggie was leaving, turned around and rushed out and smashed into a plate glass door and smashed her nose, had to be taken to the hospital, and throwing Ken into a fit of anxiety and reflections on mortality and worry about her and so on. I don't know. I think as somebody said, this the subconscious is a genius. She may have been expressing her own anxieties or whatnot. But as far as his descriptions of Miss Welty's writing, he would never stint in whatever the occasion. I'm sure he would be up to the occasion and did a magnificent description of her as the moon. And oh, that's just so beautiful. But he was almost as fulsome in his descriptions of Margaret's writing. I mean, he was very appreciative of her, compared her sometimes to Evelyn Waugh and that sort of thing.
Pearl McHaney wrote me a little note because she couldn't be here, and she said she felt that Margaret heard Ken's description of Eudora and saw the relationship, and that she returned to writing because she knew this was the one way she was going to have to, thing she was going to have to do to keep her marriage. That I've always seen Margaret's response to Eudora as a kind of genuine liking at this first meeting, but Pearl is more doubtful that was the case, and maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. I mean, maybe that she does see there's a threat here. Yeah.
Well, excuse me. I think that maybe a little bit of both, and also seeing Miss Welty at the conference and realizing, this is someone who's of an age, but still very vital, still writing, still producing. And it must have made Margaret think about her own situation and her own behavior. Like if I should get back to work because I still have the ability, and it's just really maybe silly at this point to not to get back on it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Joellen?
I want to draw our attention to the newspaper clipping that Eudora Welty sent to Ken. It's the bottom of page 249. And it made me wonder how many of these little things didn't get saved, or just, the nature of them. This is written just before she went to Santa Barbara for the conference. It says May 17th, 1975, written on a newspaper clipping showing a picture of Canada geese, quotes, silhouetted against a full moon as the birds wing northward over Baraboo, Wisconsin, mailed in a letterhead from the Monteleone Hotel in New Orleans. And she says in there, "Dear Ken, did your paper carry this marvelous sight of your Canadian geese?" And it made me think of the convergence conversations that they had with geese flying. She'd been in New Orleans, or at least she was using a New Orleans letterhead, and he mentions the moon in the beautiful way that we've just mentioned. I don't know. We've talked about the fact that Eudora had to be very careful writing to Ken, because she could just assume that Margaret might be reading a letter. But this slipped in here. This little bit of a communication really caught my eye.
Yeah, it's impossible to know what we've lost. I think we have as much, we have a pretty complete collection, but who knows? Who knows what's been lost? Tom.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that yellow hand.
That's all right. I can see your.
Thank you very much. I believe I gave short shrift to, in a previous meeting, someone asked about Miss Welty's feelings about birds, and perhaps I thought it was not as great as Ken's. But actually, reading these letters, I mean, there's birds, they flit all through these pages. And there's even a letter in this section where she counts the number of particular birds that show up in her yard, and not to forget the confluence,
And there are lots of references to birds in the stories over. Anything else about this meeting, the second meeting? All right. Well, then I thought we might, where would you like to go next? I have a list of 4 or 5 things, but let's see if anybody wants.
Well,
You want to come back to, oh, Tom, go.
taking full advantage of your invitation. When she writes to him about her friend who's murdered,
Oh, good. That's the next on my list.
it's so terrible and violent and everything. And his response, of course, is sympathetic, but it's like something out of a Macdonald book, and her reaction very soon after, when they arrest a suspect, I guess, is to have sympathy and understanding, at least, for the criminal, and try and understand him. And that's, similar to what Lou Archer would do. He wasn't just interested in nabbing somebody, but he wanted to understand them and know the sources and the reasons and all that. And Ken was like that. She was, as people and as writers. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, this is a case of a man named Frank Haynes, who was the arts editor at the local newspaper, who was directed plays at New Stage Theater, who was a great friend of Eudora's, and he was found murdered in his home, and the defense tried to make him responsible for his own murder because he was gay. And so that, who might not have killed him? Any number of people might have killed him because of that. And they managed to include in the documents at the trial materials confiscated from his house, literature and photographs that they used in this regard. And a man named Larry Bullock was ultimately convicted for the murder. And one witness testified that he told her that he hated homosexuals and wanted to bash their heads in. But there was also speculation that, and this had been between Frank Haynes and Larry Bullock, a homosexual encounter, and that had gone wrong, and that this was the source of the murder. But Eudora wasn't interested in any of that, and she was very stout in her defense of Frank Haynes, and as Tom said, and tried to understand the mindset of a man who might to do this. So, yeah. But here's another a big loss in a ongoing record of losses for Welty, I think. Anything? Yeah, go ahead. Who was that?
Did I speak over somebody?
Yeah, Melissa, is that you? Or Anna?
I was really moved personally. Of course, that happens and Ken responds. But then Ken is really struggling with his writing and goes radio silent for several months right after that. Like he responds the once, and then it's like about a month and a half that we're not hearing from, maybe even two. And I appreciate Bill's questions because I also have, loved ones who have been affected by dementia and Alzheimer's. So like I feel myself knowing that it's going to happen, trying to anticipate seeing that. And I don't know if I like see it as much in the repetitions now as I see it in these moments, these gaps of him not being with us, because we know he's struggling elsewhere. That's the thing that I kind of latched on to this week in his absence, that like little bit of time that we don't hear from him. That was what meant something to me.
Of course, one of the main reason I think he has not written is he's been trying to finish his novel, and that's been a very taxing business. Yeah. Tom, did you want to say something about that?
Yes, he had a lot of difficulty with that, and he talked to various friends and asked for assistance. I think it's listed in the book. And Bill Galt was another person who, a Santa Barbara writer, who he asked to read his manuscript and give suggestions, which Ken took. And he had been a very prickly about anybody through his life ever suggesting changes. And he and Bob Easton had written a piece together for the New York Times Magazine about the oil spill. And, I don't know that it came close to ending their friendship, but it really tested it for Bob because Ken was so offended, or, it was just, he didn't want anybody to tell him how to change something. But this was a lot different with the Blue Hammer, eventually called. And he labored on, and he even wrote, I mean, there's many examples in the writing of that book of how he sort of felt he was losing his way. And then he says to Miss Welty, I was afraid the book was going to get away from me. And that's why one other reason he had to concentrate on so much. But I felt in reading this section, I mean, just the strange subjective reaction was I had a feeling of tension and suspense, as if I were reading a suspense novel, and I wanted, hurry up, you're running out of time, seize the moments, because there's not much time left. Well,
I was interested in the way the novel's title changed. First it was The Portrait of the Artist as a Dead Man.
Yeah.
Then it was The Tarantula Hawk. Eudora clearly didn't like that title. And finally it was The Blue Hammer. So, and so that just the struggling through the titles was a kind of indication of the difficulty he was having, I think. Bill and then Harriet.
I forgot to mention in a letter that he wrote to Miss Welty on July 8th. He says about the Santa Barbara conference, it was a great week in the life of this community. You must know, I mean this literally, for the cultural life of a community is made up of such weeks scattered over the years. That really made me think about what is the cultural life of any community I'm in.
Yeah.
And how these highlight experiences shared by many people are so key to making that happen. And I have a question for you, Tom. I noted that same thing and the same discussion about when he gave his manuscript to the other writer, and how he was pretty much, that was completely a different process than he used to do. But I wondered, did Miss Welty know about that? Did she know he had done that?
I can't remember I read these letters just last night, but I can't remember. I think he tells her a little to some extent about the difficulties that he had, and I think he even wrote a whole new chapter at some point when the manuscript was at the publishers. He took the opportunity, I think, to put a whole new ending on. Which I don't think he necessarily needed, that chapter, but it certainly altered significant. It was a significant addition to the book. I think, yeah. And somebody, I saw a message, wondered if Ken had talked to or corresponded with other people or another correspondent as deeply about writing and other things as he did with her. And I would say no, not at all. I mean, he could be very pithy, in a couple of lines, or in any letter he wrote was very carefully done, and he'd have these flashes of, wonderful expression. But as far as getting in depth and detail and so on, no, I don't think he wrote to anybody like that.
Yeah, I don't think he really confided in Eudora the day-to-day difficulties he was experiencing in writing. You have some sense that it's been a tortured process, that he's having trouble, but not the details of confiding in other, sending them to other writers or anything like that, I don't think. Yeah. Harriet?
I was going to come to because I was really interested in his movement through them, from Portrait of the Artist as a Dead Man, to Tarantula Hawk, to The Blue Hammer. And when he presents them, each time he presents them, he presents it as the title. And I was surprised because he doesn't say, I'm considering this and that, and I'm choosing between them. I wondered how much maybe the press was interfering or saying, rethink that title, because that happens sometimes. But from the point of view of
happens to me every time I've written a book.
Exactly. But I was thinking about Eudora and her titles because she often went through many, many titles and would, I'm thinking about crowdsourcing, of how people now will put on social media, between these titles, which do you like? But I was just surprised that he doesn't ask her, that he keeps, and she must be, as startled as we are, each time the title just changes.
Yeah.
Well, he changed titles a lot throughout his career. You see these manuscripts, notebooks when he worked on books. There'd be various proposed titles, or he'd have one for a long time. I think the one about the fire was called Rattlesnake for a long time before it became The Underground Man. And sometimes he would, this title he didn't use on a certain book, he would use it later or try to use it later and abandon it again.
Eudora also comes to a new bit of writing at this time, beginning in 1975. And it's a story, The Shadow Club, which she never finishes, that she works on for about 6 years. So they're both struggling as writers with their material. And Ken brings this one to a finish, but Eudora never finishes The Shadow Club, which she does mention. She doesn't mention it by title, but she mentions she's working on a new story, and that's the one she's working on. Anything else? Should we come back to Beverly and talk about screen and stage and TV adaptations? Harriet, you first.
I was just going there. That is, I was just going to say that we need to talk about film, I think, in this period. And it's really interesting as they're both uh, involved in dealing with film. I was interested in last chapter at how critical Eudora was of the TV production of Ken's work, saying she wants to pull it back from the screen, and her sharpness as a critic and as a critic of books into film. At the same time that she's saying here in one of these letters, but also in general in interviews, talking about the closeness of fiction and film. And here she says that she calls them close cousins, and that she would like to work in film. But I was interested in their wryness about it. That is, Ken says, "Fortunately, I learned some time ago never to take television or anything in the movie industry seriously. I ambush behind a screen of books and occasionally throw a rock." And Eudora says in another later on, "I intend to get my feet wet, but not to go overboard myself." That they both have a kind of irony about these film projects that they're getting involved in, as he's working on Three Roads and the TV Archer, and she's getting called into the PBS production on Eudora Welty.
Bill, did you manage to see that film of Eudora being interviewed by Richard Moore that was on PBS, The Writer in America?
I did.
And where is it available if anyone wants to watch it?
Is that the one that I sent to you, a copy to you?
It is.
Yeah, it's when she gave the Willa Cather talk.
Oh no, I was thinking of, do go ahead and mention that, because that Willa Cather interview is available. And
yeah, it was really good. I really, really enjoyed it, especially because the only other one I'd seen was the one that I looked up, the Firing Line interview.
Right.
And it is quite a contrast. She's open. I mean, she really likes this guy's style. He really knew what he was talking about. He dug into both her and Willa Cather. So it was a really good short, I want to say 20 some minutes. I could only take the Firing Line interview for about 10 minutes. I had to pull the plug on that one.
I was wondering if you saw the one that she talks about being made.
In this,
Come
I
to her house
didn't.
and she goes to Sausalito to work with Richard Moore, and it's on a program called The Writer in America. And
Yeah, I tried to find it. I got stuck on the other one that was in
yeah,
Nebraska. So no, I apologize. I didn't see it.
we have it at the Welty House. Anna, do we know if it's available anyplace else? I don't know if it is or not. It was a good program.
Doing a search for it right now. I will drop links in the chat if I am able to find it. And I will also be, before we get out of here today, dropping a link shared to us by John Browning about Aristotle, Sayers on Aristotle and detective fiction. So keep an eye on the links in the chat, and I'll share with you guys what I can find.
Good. Tom?
I'm sorry I got cut off again. Now I'm back. By the way, Richard Moore did a show with Ken for that series, did a film with Ken, somewhat because of Miss Welty telling him that he should do a Ross Macdonald episode. So he did, and that was in that series. That's available somewhere. It was on the internet for a while, or there was a way to see it. And that's equally good, equally valuable.
Yeah, we should look for both of those. I was struck by what Eudora said about Brian Keith and The Archer. He's lazy, she says. He's lazy.
Right.
She's not taken in by that at all. Really dislikes that interpretation. She wasn't crazy about the script for The Robber Bridegroom, but when she went to see the play, and this happened with the Ponder Heart too, she wasn't crazy about the Ponder Heart script. But when she went to the play, the power of the actors captured her. And it was something different than what she had written, but it was something that she really loved. And she liked Kevin Kline and Patti LuPone and the Robber Bridegroom when she saw it at Ravinia, and then she saw it again in New York. And then later on, Barry Bostwick and Rhonda Cooley, who was a daughter-in-law of a couple of Jacksonians, Armand and Magnolia Cooley, played Rosamond in that, and she loved their performances too. So that the power of the theater was a strong one for her, and even though she didn't much care about the scripts when she read them cold, the productions were winning to her, I think. Yeah, Beverly.
I appreciated her cattiness about Brian Keith, that he'd gotten himself refreshed. She insinuated he'd had some kind of cosmetic surgery to move the series to Hawaii, and then it didn't take. So I appreciated just that little comment about he went to all that trouble to spiff himself up and then didn't work.
She said Ken could take out an ad disclaiming any responsibility for the claimant in Hawaii. and she asked if they got Archer's car right, and Ken said he liked the car better than he liked Archer.
Yeah, I love that too. Harriet? We're not hearing you, Harriet. Oh.
I was going to say I appreciated her comments on the theatrical performance. You were saying it, so it had a life of its own. The real test, isn't it? That is her openness to going with the idea that performance is creating something, an interpretation that is something different, but that has a life of its own.
She was pretty stage struck, always. She loved the theater. Yeah.
Well, Houseman, it is startling to think.
Yeah. John Houseman.
John Houseman. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah. No, I didn't. But I was just, you prompted me to remember when I met Miss Welty at one point. She's talking about going to the theater. I think she went to see Damn Yankees with her niece. She took her niece to the theater when the niece was a youngster, I don't know, 10, 12, something. And they got back to the hotel, and the fellow who had played the villain, let's say, in Damn Yankees, would it have been Ray Walston, I guess, bore a resemblance to the elevator operator in I think it was the Algonquin where they were staying, and Miss Welty's niece thought that that was the same person. Thought that the elevator operator had been in the play, and then raced back to his elevator operator duties at the Algonquin, and said, that must be quite a difficult feat for him to, make it back in time.
Yeah, Joe Ellen. Oop, can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
I was trying to turn it on in the little box or off. I really thought those few pages were just exhilarating. We whipped through such a range of mentions from the Glass Menagerie to Chinatown, Murder on the Orient Express. And then and they do from time to time. I think they talked about the three roads based on a Ross Macdonald book there. And then we get back to some of his work later. But it was really just like a roller coaster ride. But I loved where she mentions the Houseman musical, The Rubber Bridegroom. The real test is whether they'll keep it in the repertory, along with Arms in the Man, A School for Scandal, and The Cherry Orchard.
One other thing, because I know we're running out of time, I just wanted to mention Eudora's travel keeps up a pace here in 1975. So she's gone in February for several days to DC, to the National Council on the Arts, to Seattle in May for honorary degrees, and to visit New York City in May, to Santa Barbara in June, to Ravinia near Chicago in August, to Washington and New York in September and October, to Mount Holyoke in November, to Hartford and back, and DC and back in December. So she was on the road. And here this frantic pace of travel is continuing for her, which makes writing very difficult. Yeah. Anything else? Last chance, and we'll move on to 1976. Yes, Beverly.
Again, just some of the little asides with how many honorary doctorates she was given during that time. She mentioned 3 to him, and then she'd gotten another one, which she was, as she says, almost embarrassed to tell you that I've got to go to. I think that's when she went to Amherst to get yet another honorary doctorate.
Yeah, it was pretty honorary. Yeah, many honorary degrees. Yeah. I can get the exact number for you. So, all right, going once, going twice. Anna, it's up to you.
All righty. Well, thank you all once again for joining us. We will reconvene next week for a discussion of Chapter 6, 1976. That'll be our last discussion before we take a brief 2-week spring break there in the middle of March. Hard to believe March is already here. But with that, I will plan to see you guys next week, and we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.